I read 30 books recommended by 30 of my favourite booktubers. Last year when I made this video, I promised myself I would be nice to Editing Scott and only read a reasonable number of books. Reading Scott loves this project. I have 10 5-star reads to tell you about. Editing Scott? Editing Scott's not so fond of this. Why won't he let me sleep? So this is how this works. I watched a bunch of best books of 2023 videos. I picked one book from each video and read that book. And now I'm going to review them from worst to best and find out who the champion of book recommendations is this year. But first, I'm going to tell you why I love these booktubers. I always feel a little bit bad when I make these videos that I don't include everybody I love. And really, I've got to learn to not be a bit of a booktube hoe. Hopefully, you'll find a new booktuber or a dozen to subscribe to. Got to go through them in the order there in my notes. Gem of books. If you like books that hurt your heart, punch you in the face, cut you, steal your wallet, and leave you to die in a ditch, then Gemma is your lady. She also loves The Woman's Prize, a good historical fiction, add in a healthy dose of speculative fiction and a pinch of non-fiction, and that's what you get with Gemma. Frank and honest reviews. She's not afraid to tell you she didn't like a book. Most importantly, deep down, she's a very silly person, also on surface level. Gemma's favourite book last year was The Book of Night Women by Marlon James. Marlon James and I have a love-hate relationship, so I'm definitely putting a little bit of trust in Gemma's recommendation here. Bandy's books. I love Caitlin's taste in books. I remember the first time I watched a video, I was on a bit of an African literature kick and I added 3 or 4 books to my TBR in one of her videos. But it's not just African literature. She's really global and diverse in her reading. She reads a bit of most genres, but I really enjoy the hard-hitting historical fictions and new releases, which she reviews in abundance. She is a lovely human being, kind, not too serious, and really intelligent. Caitlin recommends As Long as the Lemon Tree Grows. Even though it's Syrian and not African, feels typical to the sort of books that she adds to my TBR. Charlotte Malloy. It's impossible to mention Charlotte's channel without mentioning the lush rainforest that is the backdrop to most of her videos. She has a presentation style that I think matches that perfectly. It is very easy to listen to Charlotte talk about books. She is also a booktuber who is not afraid to share any negative opinions she has of books that didn't work for her. That is something I really value in a booktuber. Where I think Charlotte excels is in quantifying why a book doesn't work for her. This makes her reviews really valuable because you don't need to have the same taste as her to get a book recommendation from her. Charlotte recommends When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. Jen the Librarian. I really enjoy Jen's cozy, insightful, and occasionally sarcastic book reviews. Jen reads whatever she wants to. Don't try and tell her what her reading taste is because she'll change it. She is a fantastic advocate for LGBT literature and is so knowledgeable in that area. I really value her recommendations regardless of whether the book is gay, straight, or undecided. I think the most Jen thing I could do when classifying the depth of her LGBT lit knowledge is to mock a Tory politician. So when it comes to gay books, Jen is
the suppository of all wisdom.
Thank you, former Australian Prime Minister Captain Bullshit. Jen recommends Lie With Me by Phillipe Besson, translated by Molly Ringwald. Yes, that Molly Ringwald. She is so much cooler than Judd Nelson. Savage reads. Hannah regularly produces videos where she reviews 3 to 5 books. She is a well-balanced booktuber. A lot of booktubers will give you an emotional response or a breakdown of ideas, and Hannah does both in her reviews. I absolutely love her reading taste. It's a lot like Caitlin from Bandy's books. There is so much variety. It is truly international, very diverse, both in terms of representation and in terms of genre. Literary fiction with a sprinkling of everything. A truly underhyped booktuber who makes quality reviews about interesting books, and I would be very unsurprised if she blew up in the near future. Hannah recommends How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruze. Made You Book. Gretchen creates these wonderful, insightful book reviews. She's a book reviewer that frequently improves my experience of a novel with her reviews, just by pointing out a different way of looking at things. If I could pick one booktuber to teach me English lit, it would be Gretchen. Intelligent intelligent reviews that are not didactic but rather poke you in the brain. Gretchen reads mostly translated and literary fiction, although she does have something a bit lighter in there at all times just to mix things up. From Gretchen's Best Books video, I have picked Neves by Sasha Naspini, translated from Italian by Clarissa Botford. Sarah MG reads. I think Sarah might be the booktuber in this video I've been subscribed to for the longest. She started booktube at about the same time as me, then she went away for about a year, and when she came back she started to put so much effort into her videos, and they're so wonderfully concise now. She has quite varied taste. Thrillers, contemporary, science fiction, fantasy, literary, memoir, and the book she recommends is the chunky Covenant of Water by Adrienne Verghese. Sean the Book Maniac. It is so easy to love Sean. He is such a wonderful, lovely man, very intelligent, funny, and self-derisive. I'm not sure if I've seen more refined self-abuse skills before. He also doesn't mind a dirty double entendre. I just love listening to Sean talk about books he either completely loves or books he really didn't love at all. The more passionate he gets, the better reviewer he is. Sean likes literary fiction that makes him feel emotions. He likes literary writing that transports you into a character's being. And when he's very happy or very upset, his reviews really take you into his being. Sorry, I promise I'll stop with the bad double entendres now. Sean recommends Loop Track by Sue Orr. Shelley Swearingen. Shelley is my friendly booktube nemesis. I love her videos. She is so unapologetically herself, whatever she is feeling. You can get chilled out Shelley. You can get excited and worked up Shelley when she loves or hates a book. She can be intelligent and deconstruct a book, or she can just give you emotions and sounds. I love the way she talks about her family. She so very clearly loves them. Just a fantastic booktuber, except that we hardly ever agree on books. Shelley hating a book is often a good sign for me. Similarly, Shelley will often love a book that I have DNF'd. But there are exceptions like Middlemarch and Women Talking. Only a monster could dislike those books. And she's not a monster, she's a friendly nemesis. When I agree with Shelley, it's often an exceptional book, so I'm always happy to take a chance on her recommendation. Because if she recommends me 9 duds and 1 Middlemarch, I'm winning. I'm winning by a lot. So the book I'm taking a chance on is The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. Lindy Magpie reads. Watching Lindy's videos, you might get the impression that she's a bit of a Pollyanna reader, but that's very deceiving. She is very good at both selecting and DNFing her books. She produces these lovely Friday read style videos, often from her garden, perfect viewing for when I am chilled out or tired or hungover. I want to say Lindy reads literary fiction and translated fiction with a focus on reading diversely, particularly Indigenous and LGBT books, but Lindy could literally read anything. YA, graphic novels, picture books. There's often something speculative, and I love her taste in non-fiction. She's very talented at appreciating a book for what it is trying to do, a skill which I am very envious of. Lindy recommends And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliot. Cat's Field Notes. I have a great appreciation for booktubers who put the effort into creating their videos and doing those little touches that maybe some viewers don't even notice, but make their videos just joyful to watch. And Kat is one of the very best videographers on booktube. She is a very efficient and wonderful reviewer of books too. She is a relatively new booktuber to me, but I'm really enjoying her at the moment, and I'm picking up a lot of feminist and translated literature from her recommendations. Kat recommends Minor Detail by Adana Shablai, translated from Arabic by Elizabeth Jackie. Olivia's Catastrophe is a channel where Olivia reads books, drinks tea, and attempts to sabotage her opposition to win by any means. I don't care what type of books you read, go and subscribe to Olivia. You have something in common with her. She is the perfect booktuber if you want to broaden your reading tastes. We both love literary fiction exploring grief, but Olivia also loves fantasy, romance, middle grade, non-fiction, horror, translated literature, memoir, contemporary plays, classic Afrofuturisms, LGBT, horror, short stories, and if I've missed your favourite type of book, it's probably just an oversight. She effortlessly pinpoints the qualities in the books she enjoys, but my favourite is when Olivia is talking about the negative aspects of a book and then says, but I don't care, I loved this book anyway. Not only is it joyful to see her loving on a book, but she is communicating the goods and the bads of the book for me, so I can always make an informed choice about whether to read it or not. Olivia recommends Concerning My Daughter from Kim Hye-Jin, translated from Korean by Jamie Chang. Eyes on Indie. Sarah has the best vision for her channel of any booktuber I've seen ever. She knows exactly why she is making a video and exactly what her viewers get from watching it. She is highlighting the books independent and university presses publish, and every time I watch her channel, I get excited about books I've never heard of before. Now, this is all wonderful, super informative, and very interesting, but when she reviews a book, wow, that lady has a brain in her head, maybe even like 2 or 3. She explains things that I didn't even know I didn't understand. She makes books I've already read better. Truly a valuable booktuber. Sarah recommends The Parisian by Isabel Hamad. Hamad's Enter Ghost was one of my favourite reads of 2023, so this was a very easy sell. Page Turners with Katia. Katia reads a lot of translated literature, particularly Japanese and Korean. She also reads science fiction, fantasy classics, historical fiction, literary fiction, and really just a bit of everything. She's a bit punk, a bit cozy, and a bit nerdy, all mashed together. She produces well-considered and succinct reviews that are just so efficient at communicating what a book is about. Occasionally she makes these great discussion videos. She did one on how AI is changing publishing and one on why booktubers quit. From Katia's best of video, I am reading Idle Burning by Rin Usami, translated from Japanese by Yoneda. Books and things. If you read historical fiction or classics, particularly Victorian classics, you're probably already very familiar with Katie. If you're not, I think it's uncontroversial to label Katie as one of the very best channels on BookTube. Katie recommends The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. Masala and her books. Masala is the smallest booktuber on this list, and she really shouldn't be, so go give her some love. She reads lots of backlist books. She's quite diverse, both in terms of her reading about different experiences and people, and in terms of translated speculative literary non-fiction, etc. She makes these cozy, easy to watch videos, regular wraps, list videos, and TBR videos, often with a vlog included. She recommends Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis. Stalking Kafka. Every time I mention Jess, I think, how does she only have 760 subscribers? Which is a lot more than the 200 odd subscribers that I first saw her with, but she is still chronically undersubscribed. Jess is a combination of everything I look for in a booktuber. Silly and funny, and very intelligent. Every time I think I understand the YouTube algorithm, I go and check to see if Jess has randomly gained 5 to 10,000 new subscribers and realize that I don't get it at all. She reads a lot of literary fiction, translated fiction, non-fiction, and the occasional thing that's a bit lighter. She's Canadian, so there's a healthy serve of Canadian lit too. I get so many of my recommendations from Jess. The only book in her top 10 that I hadn't already read was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I've got to be honest, this doesn't represent the sort of books that I usually get from Jess, but trying books outside of my comfort zone is one of the joys of BookTube. Kia the Scrivener. Kia is another booktuber with a broad bookish taste. She follows bookish prizes, she reads classics, and there is a sprinkling of middle grade fantasy, historical fiction, translated non-fiction in there as well. You can tell she puts a fair bit of research and or preparation into her videos. A quality booktuber who I think everybody should be following. I took Kia's recommendation from her favourite classics of the year, Whose Names Are Unknown by Centaura Bab. Natabi and her books. When Natabi talks about a book she loves, it makes me happy. She's so infectiously joyful and enthusiastic. It's very hard not to get excited with her. She's been on a real classic kick this last 12 months, reading almost exclusively classics. Classics don't have to be very old, and the book that Natabi loved is My Brilliant Friend by Eleanor Ferrante, translated from Italian by Anne Goldstein. My Reading Life. Heidi is a booktuber who balances fiction and non-fiction. It is mostly literary fiction with science or nature writing, but Heidi, like basically everybody in this list, doesn't fit neatly into the description that I have given her and reads a little bit of everything. Heidi, along with Olivia, who I've already mentioned, subverts my expectation around vlogs which is not usually my kind of video, but I make an exception for these two. Heidi recommends The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. Erdrich is an author who I don't get along with because she writes magical realism, and that's really not my thing, but Heidi says that she thinks I'll be fine with this. Ben reads good. Ben is smashing it on Booktube. Clear, concise, and clever reviews. Ben reads a lot of new release literary fiction. He reads a lot of book prize long lists, which is why I've gone really random and picked Flowers for Algernon from Ben's best of book video. I think you would like Ben's channel if you also enjoyed another fabulous booktuber, Eric Carl Anderson, which is where we're heading next. You all know Eric. He's like the godfather of the new release literary fiction section of Booktube, with a little bit more kindness, love, and good book reviews, and a little bit less murder, extortion, and money laundering, as far as we know. From Eric's best of video, I've picked the winner of the National Book Awards, Blackout by Justin Torres. Nerdy Nurse reads. Alyssa is someone who just endlessly impresses me with her bookish knowledge and intelligence. Also, if she was doing this video, she'd already been done. And she is the only booktuber I would watch review Thomas Pynchon. Alyssa reads a lot of literary fiction, classics, new releases, horror, and fantasy. She recommends Mayfly by CJ Lead, which both interests and terrifies me. Readhead reads. Beck is the newest booktuber on the list. I really love the way she talks about books. I could listen to her talk for weeks on end. She is an Aussie booktuber, and there is a good amount of Australian and Kiwi literature in her bookish diet, which otherwise is mostly speculative fiction and books with a queer spin on things. I really love that she uses flags to denote the LGBT literature she reviews too. She recommends The Dawn Hounds by Sasha Stronach, which is another book very much outside of my comfort zone that I'm looking forward to trying. Charlie Brooks reads. I feel like anybody who doesn't like Charlie Brooks is some kind of monster. Like, I don't like Charlie Brooke, and I eat babies. How can you not love Charlie Brooke? She's lovely, cozy, likes to laugh, and is intelligent. So if I change my mind about Charlie, I'll be good on the eating babies then. Charlie makes these lovely chatty reading catch-ups. She combines her usual bookish stuff, you know, what she's read, what she's planning on starting next, with what's happening in her life and any other bookish goings on. I just love her insight and the joy she gets from the books that she loves, and the anti-joy she gets from the books that she doesn't love. Charlie reads a bit of everything. I feel like if we start with The Woman's Prize, now that they've added in non-fiction, and just completely broaden that, and you kind of get Charlie's taste. Charlie recommends Small Joys by Elvin James Mensah. I DNF'd this book last year, but the last time I did this project, I read Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens on the recommendation of Callie from Curatorially Yours, and I did a complete 180 on it after DNFing it. So I've decided to pick a book that I DNF'd, and it's going to be Small Joys that I give a second chance to. Alice and the Giant Bookshelf has way too many books. Last year I wanted to include Alice in one of these videos, but I had read literally every book Alice put in her top 10, and most of them were 5-star reads, but the ones that weren't were DNFs, which is interesting. This year, I only had one choice, and that is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, which is a middle grade and another book completely outside of my comfort zone. And I think, just like Charlie Brooks, if you pick The Woman's Prize but make it broader, but this time you combine it with the tastes of a mystery thriller fan, and then you have Alice. Bookish. I love Brian's channel, particularly his discussion videos, where he goes over bookish issues and often political issues. His point of view generally combines don't be an arsehole values with data, facts, evidence, and research, while calling out misinformation and disinformation. Very hard to disagree with Brian. When it comes to his taste in books, Brian is well balanced between fiction, translated fiction, and non-fiction, and you're just as likely to see him reviewing Jesmyn Ward or Cormac McCarthy. He has quite a literary taste, but within literary fiction circles, he's probably the hardest person to stereotype, often contradicting what you think he likes by liking something that is completely the opposite. Brian recommends Blood Red by Gabriela Ponce, translated from Spanish by Sarah Booker, Mercy's Bookish Musing. I know Mercedes has been a big big presence on Booktube for a while, but I only started watching her last year, and why wasn't I watching her earlier? We have such a big crossover in fiction that we read. She reads so many new releases. The number of times I've seen a book that I want to see reviewed before I decide if I pick it up or not, and then I watch Mercedes and she is discussing it in her reviews is incredible. Such a valuable booktuber. She recommends Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan, scally-dandling about the books. Roz is such a wonderfully intelligent booktuber. Her reviews are wonderful. Another one of these booktubers who can improve a book after you've finished reading it with their reviews. She's quite diverse in her reading. There's a lot of classics, new releases, non-fiction, poetry and translated fiction. Roz has a project to read a book from every country in the world, which she is almost completed. So you often get a random book from places that you've hardly ever heard of, like Bhutan or Cape Verde, places where we just don't see literature from. This is a project that I'm working on too, and I'm a long way further back than Roz, which is why I've picked a novel from the Central African Republic from Roz's best of video. Co-Wives, Co-Widows by Adrienne Yabouza, translated from French by Rachel McGill. And the last booktuber I'm going to shout out is Say Kevy. Kevy is everybody's favourite autistic trans drag queen celebrity book nerd. She reads basically everything trans. She got me onto Hazel Jane Plant, who is such an incredible author. She also loves mystery novels, horror, thriller, silly fantasy. Okay, by silly fantasy I mean Terry Pratchett. She also loves powerful, emotional poetry that is so often written by black women. She has the best laugh on Booktube and is just so easy to like. Kevy recommends 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hum. Shout out over. TBR done. Let's review some books. We're going to start with the book I like the least and work our way up to the book I like the best. The quality this year has been amazing, so there's going to be some pretty good books pretty low down the ratings. I do, however, have 5 DNFs to talk about. Now, if you're new here, that might sound like a lot, but trust me, it isn't. I'm brutal. There are 3 books I identified as outside of my comfort zone, and 2 of them, they just weren't me books. And that will happen if you try books outside of your comfort zone. The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Every time I do one of these videos, I pick a book Jess recommends and it doesn't work for me. Then, between videos, everything she recommends me is gold. She's clearly at a disadvantage because I read most of the books she loves during the year, and all that are left are books that I'm not so sure about. In all honesty, this book is probably fantastic for the correct reader, but it is blending horror thriller with fantasy elements, and I really can't do that. That is the genre fiction form of magical realism, my least favourite genre. On top of that, I really wasn't loving Stephen Graham Jones's writing style. Writing style is such a personal thing, but I was having to reread way too much to understand what was pretty basic and accessible sentences, really. The way he communicates, it's just not intuitive to me. I mean, seeing that this book has been published, other readers clearly don't have the same issue as I do. The Dawn House by Sasha Stronach. This is another book that just wasn't for me, but I definitely think some of you will be interested in this one. This is a mystery sci-fi, more specifically a Kiwi lesbian dystopian sci-fi about a murdered police officer. I really struggle with books where a police officer is the protagonist and we're meant to like them. I won't go into the politics of this other than to say that Abigail from Philosophy Tube has a fantastic video that expresses a lot of my thoughts and conclusions quite succinctly, with evidence, research, and examples. I also know our police officer is a lesbian, and that is illegal in this world, and she is being presented with these moral choices straight from the off. So there's almost definitely going to be some pretty good commentary on the police and the LGB community, but I'm already a long way out of my comfort zone. There's all these sort of weird biotechy things that I don't understand, and there was just quite a lot of information thrown at me, which is not something I like and is really unavoidable in a lot of science fiction novels. One of the reasons I avoid these type of books is I struggle with too detailed world building. It's not the part of the book I'm interested in. I'm interested in characters and relationships, and I'm especially not interested in those things if the book is also high-paced. But this is a very personal taste. I feel like this book is actually probably doing a lot of things that a lot of people will like in the science fiction, dystopian genres, and it's just too far out of my comfort zone. Blood Red by Gabriela Ponce. Nothing attracts me to a book quicker than hearing it is set in or it is written by an author from a country or a region that I know very little about. And in this case, we're talking about Ecuador. I think if Brian had have said translated from Spanish instead of Ecuadorian fiction in his video, I might have picked a different book. But the blinkers were on as soon as he said Ecuadorian. There was an incredible amount of sex at the beginning of this novel, and I'm not prudish. I read about sex all the time, but at one point I think there were literally more sex scenes in this novel than characters that were introduced. And I wasn't connecting with the protagonist. And I didn't even know why she was having the sex. Was she horny? Was she sad and looking for something to take her mind off it? Was she in love? At one point she had sex with another woman and I'm like, I didn't know she was bisexual. Has she always been bi, or is this her first time? This is what I think of as an example first style writing. I'm not hinting at why she's doing this. I'm just going to assume it will make sense later on in the book. But the scenes weren't connecting, they weren't building anything for me, and it just becomes raw information that I need to hold in my head until it is useful later in the book, and that is not the setup of a novel I like. It is told in a very stream of consciousness narrative, which is not my favourite. I basically think stream of consciousness is always hit and miss. I get the feeling this book is making a commentary on relationships, mental health, and desire, but I DNF'd it too early on to be sure. I don't like that style where it feels like the book is starting in the middle. The Parisian by Isabella Hammad. This novel is about a Palestinian man who goes to Paris to receive an education and falls in love, set during the First World War. He gets involved in Middle Eastern politics. There's pressure from back home to return and marry. That is, marry a Muslim woman and not the lady he has fallen in love with. I've talked a lot in this channel about how much I loved Enter Ghost, Hammad's latest novel. There are glimpses of that quality in this novel, so I can see why Sarah loved this book. But there are so many characters at the beginning of this novel, and Hammad just writes. She doesn't create her characters on the page. She very clearly understands them, but she introduces them so quickly. She's not making it very easy for you, and there were multiple times when I was reading that I realized that two different characters were actually the same character. And at 710 pages, this isn't a short novel, so I think that Hammad could have either spent a bit more time introducing those characters or trimmed out those characters if they weren't that necessary and made the plot just that little bit simpler, which I think would have allowed her readers to focus on the characters and events, which is sort of what I'm reading for. And the last book I DNF'd is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. Usually when I DNF a book, it's pretty early on. I give a book a chance to set things up. I sample the writing style. I give it enough time to get me interested. And if it's not working for me, I move on. I like to understand what I think a book is trying to do before I give up on it. Now, I got over 2/3 of the way into this book, and it isn't short either. 740 pages. Verghese's writing was nice. I don't mind meandering with his characters as he sets things up, but I kept reading this and I was asking, where is the source of the tension? What are the themes he's exploring? And worse, what are his characters feeling right now? This is an intergenerational novel, and the characters start to age out at one point, having the children take center stage. I started to realize that I didn't too much care about the children. I only really cared about the adults. This is also a book that has child marriage in it, and we know that that's culturally normal for the time and place it was written in, but that's not explored. We are talking about a 40-year-old man marrying somebody 28 years his junior. He's depicted as a gentle giant. He's nice to her. But I needed someone selling me on why he did it, and not even discussing it at all. It's almost an attempt to gaslight the reader into thinking it's normal. If you're an author that doesn't have an interest in discussing child marriage, then only allow adults to marry in your book. This choice from Verghese is either incredibly naive or incredibly problematic. The central premise of this book is that the man's family all die from something to do with water, and the woman marries into the family without knowing that. So grief is obviously a central part of this novel, which is one of my favourite themes. But again, it wasn't really explored. I understood the characters were feeling grief based on what had happened, but take me there. This is over 700 pages. I'm not expecting you to be economic and cut things from it. I feel like somebody got a really good book and censored out all the stuff in it that I enjoy. I'm not really sure what Verghese was trying to do here, but it didn't work. The DNFs are over. Now I have 3 books that I'm going to put in the strengths and weaknesses categories. How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruze. Kara loses her factory job in her mid-50s due to the recession. She is forced back into the job market and it's difficult for her. Hannah, whose recommendation was, recommended the audiobook, and I would second that recommendation. But having read this as an audiobook, I now wonder how it would have been handled in the text format. Kara is talking to a job counsellor, and I think the ethnic divide was really well highlighted by the accents. Kara has a strong Dominican accent while the counsellor has a strong white lady accent. I also enjoyed the way Kara answered some of the questions with blunt sincerity and in a very informal tone. I generally found this to be a very effective way of highlighting the flaws in the US job seeker system, which are very similar to the flaws in the Australian job seeker system, and I'm sure other countries can relate to them. For example, being required to go to job interviews that are too far away. In Kara's case, because the radius of acceptable travel is measured in kilometres and not in minutes to travel there. On the downside, I didn't really connect to Kara. She is such a jumble of emotions and I don't feel they really came through properly. This is not a super complex book with brainy themes. It is a simple novel that requires you to empathise with Kara and to hopefully fall in love with her character. Kara was sweet. I can see why people fall in love with her, but I just don't feel like I was transported there. I don't feel like I was taken into her soul. I don't feel I understood her. And I feel like I fell in sympathy with her, not in love with her. Every reader's experience will hinge on whether they love Kara or not. But Cruze couldn't make me forget that this was a story and not a real person. The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. This is about a family of 3 and it is told from the point of view of the son, who is on the cusp of being a man. Quite early on in this novel, something terrible and traumatic happens to the mother and she won't talk about it. She spends a lot of time locked up in her bedroom. Her husband even starts sleeping out of the bedroom and in his study. She's really traumatized by the events. Father and son take it upon themselves to investigate, and this almost becomes a quest to become a man sort of novel. We see the son's image of his father kind of crack as he discovers while he is a judge, he presides over very minor cases to do with things like hot dogs. There is a lot about the Indigenous court system here and its different roles to the white or US court system. I can see why Louise Erdrich is so well thought of. The quality of this novel is intermittently breathtaking. There is a scene where the wife is cooking, taking something out of the oven when the husband comes home, and I found that to be such a super powerful scene. Easily the best scene in this book and one of the best I've read really ever. Something that will stay with me. It is a skill I value to put you in the head of a character, to understand what they're going through, their emotions. To do that with 2 characters at the same time in the same scene, to make me empathize with both characters, that is special writing. While I think the parents are constructed brilliantly, I don't think the same is true of the son. Erdrich could have got away with that if he wasn't the central figure of the novel. I think it's kind of a case of take one thing off before you leave the house. Erdrich has the impact of the events on her mother, how that impacts the entire family, which is done reasonably well. But she also has this mystery and a coming of age novel which are not done well. And that's due to her inability to capture or adequately convey the voice of this boy. If you've read this book, you know what happens to the boy later on. There is such a huge event in his life of way more importance and the impact of dropping a casserole. And I'm just not there in his head when it happens. I don't know if he's scared or angry or relieved or happy or guilty or unmoved. I really appreciate the depiction of the community and some of the side characters, especially the older people discussing sex. That was both funny and I felt I gained an insight into the culture of this group of humans. Intermittently brilliant, but very flawed novel. We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. Some authors really do like to return to the same themes in different shapes and sizes, and for Ishiguro, that is memory. Now that I'm about halfway through his works, I'm a bit over it. I'm finding it repetitive, and to be frank, this book is not even close to The Remains of the Day. It is never good when an author returns to the same themes that they've already done fantastically, only to be outshone by their own book. Christopher was 9 when his parents disappeared in Shanghai, where they lived at the time. Orphaned, he moved to the UK, only to return to Shanghai as an adult during the end of the Sino-Japanese War. Now a trained and very successful detective, Christopher turns his powers of deduction to his parents' disappearance. Ishiguro uses this to set up a parody of the crime genre, the beautiful, mysterious woman, the protagonist throwing himself in danger's way, nobody believing him, nothing being what it seems, and a string of coincidences that nobody could believe. The unblinkered belief in an outcome that our protagonist doesn't explain and has no right to believe. And while Ishiguro is doing this, he is trying to demonstrate the impact that the tragedy had on Christopher's life, while Christopher is acting all stiff upper-lipped on the topic. Similar to The Roundhouse, there are elements of this book that are done fantastically. Ishiguro's writing is something else. His ability to communicate Christopher's damage to us, despite using him as a narrator and keeping him in denial about everything the entire novel, is impressive. But his parodying isn't clear. If I have to think about a joke before I get it, before I understand it, it's not funny, which may be down to me being pretty inexperienced in the crime thriller genre. I definitely think that there were jokes I missed because I don't read crime and thriller a lot. He is also trying to discuss serious issues at the same time as parodying something, and that means all the flaws he's trying to highlight in crime thrillers become flaws in his book. It's almost like the better the book is, the worse it becomes. For example, the plot is idiotic and unrealistic, which is the point. And I guess that's really amusing, but he's still left with a plot that's both idiotic and unrealistic. I think this novel is too ambitious, with bits that were done amazingly, but as a collection, I don't think it works. Although Ishiguro is one of those authors that even when he tries something and fails, what's left is usually of pretty reasonable quality. Caveats over if you've got this far. We're on to the good books now. As I said at the start of this video, there are quite a few good books to discuss, and that's what we're up to. These books were either great but outshone by other books, or were great but had some minor issues. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is a story about Charlie, a man who was born with a very low IQ. He is mentally disabled. He signs up to a trial of a new procedure to increase his intelligence. He is tested against Algernon, a white mouse, who has also had the procedure done to him and can now solve mazes super quickly, much quicker than Charlie can. Charlie's intelligence slowly increases, and so does the way that everybody treats him, the way he values himself. He realizes things like people that he thought were his friends were actually just picking on him. This novel was published in 1966, and some of the language used is very much of that era. I know that that will put off some readers. I think the language also has the potential to impact how we read the novel now compared to how somebody would have read it when it was published. I think the novel is essentially an exploration of the importance we place on human intelligence and how we treat people in various aspects of our lives based on their intelligence, from situations around employment to family lives to marriage. It very much explores how alienating being an intellectual outsider is on both sides of the spectrum. This is the sort of sci-fi I really like, when the science is the premise and it is used to tell us something about ourselves. Unfortunately, the themes weren't fully explored, and the characters other than Charlie were just cutouts. The women were stereotypes. Actually, a lot of the men were stereotypes too. But despite these pretty major flaws, I really enjoyed this book. It was so easy to like Charlie, to witness my opinions of him change as his intelligence changed, to learn something about myself from reading it. And when a book does those sort of things really well, it is very easy to ignore the flaws in the writing. Keyes really just has one good character, one interesting theme, a simple but solid plot, serviceable prose, but he is able to channel his protagonist's emotions. He's not trying to do much, but he has everything he needs to write a good book. Whose Names Are Unknown by Sonora Babb. This novel has a really interesting backstory. It is about the Dust Bowl era depression, and it was due to be published in 1939 when Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath came out. The similarity in themes between the novels is really evident. Two books cut from the same cloth. In the belief that Steinbeck had already adequately explored these themes, the novel was shelved and wasn't published for 65 years until finally in 2004 the University of Oklahoma Press decided to publish it. The head of Random House at the time said it would look like an imitation, and I do see that. This is a good book that is somewhat withered in comparison to Steinbeck's masterpiece. The title comes from the quote, "To Mary and John Doe, whose names are unknown. You and each of you will please take notice that you are required to vacate and surrender up to me the premises now occupied by you, said premises being known as the Californian Land Unit 20, Manager Hayes and Berkeley Company." This was an actual letter. The novel itself follows the Dunn family as they look for work and are exploited. They consider joining a union but face bullying and intimidation, even anti-union spies, and they consider starving themselves as part of a strike in order to make money go further. At one point in this novel, they're even told that rent on the unit at the farm they were expected to work on will be a certain price, but that light bulbs will be extra. I think that this is a really solid, wonderful book. I think Steinbeck wrote a great book which completely overshadows this book. However, I'm a big fan of Steinbeck. I think he is the best American author prior to the modern generation. That's not an opinion that I expect everybody will share. And I think if you disagree with me on where Steinbeck sits in the hierarchy of American authors, or you've managed to avoid Grapes of Wrath until now, this is a really fantastic book, well worth picking up. A book that is really criticizing rampant, unchecked capitalism and demonstrating how it exploits the poor, something that I think is very relevant to our modern times. The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. On bed rest, a detective turns his attention to Richard III and the murders in the Tower, a 500-year-old cold case, if you like. This is a really interesting case, and I think that Richard III should be taught at high schools. I think that there is something super useful to learn about him. This is also a really hard book to review, because I am sure that my audience will have people who know everything about Richard III, people who know nothing about Richard III, and lots of people in between. You're all going to have different experiences from this book, so I'm not going to fill in the gaps. You know what you know. Remember what you know. There are 3 experiences you could have with this novel. A. You didn't know a horse, my kingdom for a horse is a Richard III quote, even if he never actually said that. In which case, this is a cool historical mystery novel with a cozy modern timeline. You get to learn so much stuff about history, and you get to have a really good mystery novel as well. B. You know that he murdered his nephews in the Tower. You know about Henry VII, the Battle of Bosworth, and the War of the Roses. But that's probably about it. And I think you're the target audience. You are going to love this book. You are getting everything that the first group is getting and more. C. Now, if you're a C, you know you're a C. You know why I'm being cryptic about what a C is. You're going to have a completely different experience to everybody else. And you would imagine that that experience would be boring AF. But actually, it's really not. I think if you were an A or a B, you would get a completely different experience rereading this book for a second time. You get this really interesting exploration of politics and power. I think the issue this book has is that because the readers of this book will have quite a range of knowledge about Richard III, there is a lot of hand-holding, which really slows things down. Also, if you're not interested in history or the history of English kings and queens, this is probably not the book for you. But if you are, And especially if you enjoy either non-fiction or mystery novels, then this is a really good literary fiction for you. Idle Burning by Rin Usami, translated by Yoneda. Akiri is a high school student who is obsessed with her Oshi, a member of a J-pop band. She writes a blog about him. She spends hours researching him. She's dedicated to him, understanding everything about him. One day when somebody playfully hacks her Oshi's account, she spots it before he announces it. Then the rumors of him assaulting a female fan surface, and she doesn't know what to think about him. It doesn't seem like the actions of her Oshi. For Akari, being at the center of this fandom is a chance to transform herself from socially awkward into social butterfly. But her obsession comes at the price of her offline life. Akiri doesn't conform to the social rules and is punished for that. Similarly, we see Oshi trying to break away from his J-pop identity, and we start to wonder about the realities of Akiri's description of him. The book really isn't about a problematic J-pop star. There are things about him that are never resolved, but what it is about is following him, what obsession with him means for this teenage girl, the sense of community she gets from being a superfan and hanging out with other superfans, the friends she makes, and how those things are missing from her life, and how Oshi's career change threatens her way of living. One of the themes I quite like is how online friends can play a role in your life. While it's clear that Akari is depressed, that element is expressed positively. As somebody with a lot of online friends who can be a little bit socially awkward in real life and who has battled with his mental health, this is all something I love. Whatever the deal, being part of an online community and talking to people and making online friends is positive, even if the reasons you turn to it are negative. And getting that balance right was really important to me. The balance of good and bad that comes from living online. The novel itself is really quite brief, and there isn't a great deal of discussion around the themes in the book. It is also quite gentle, avoiding anything too gritty, and I do think a little bit more grit could have improved this book considerably. Blackouts by Justin Torres. This is a novel about two gay men from different generations having a conversation. Winner of the National Book Awards, and I get why this is so hyped. This is not a Scott book though. It is trying to push back on what the novel is, experimenting with form, and I'm not that interested in that kind of stuff. But it is still, nonetheless, a book I enjoyed. And I think that's the mark of a really good book, when you know you're not the target audience of it, but yet you still like the book. Central to this novel is the friendship between these two men, the sharing of information and experiences, the passing down of queer knowledge, and it becomes kind of a queer history retelling. Torres has twisted pieces of history into his novel. It's very hard to know what's real life and what is fiction. Jan Gay is the inspiration for the character Wan Gay. In real life, Gay was the author of Sex Variance, a study in homosexual patterns, a text Torres has blacked out, leaving only certain words to create blackout poetry, which he places between the chapters. Gay is dying, and the novel is tackling grief, love, friendship, culture, generational learning. A lot of the stories that these two men tell each other become allegorical. There is so much literary meat in this book. There are the obvious things like Juan's last name literally being gay, to the reference to the Argentinian novel Kiss of the Spider Woman, which I only got because I researched the novel prior to reviewing it for you all. There is quite a lot to get from this novel, a lot of levels and a lot of layers. I really recommend researching Jan Gay before reading this book. I enjoyed the queer friendship, the telling of stories between these two men from different generations, the caring for a dying man. That is the kind of literature I like. I could have done without the experimental stuff, but other readers will take joy from that. And it's not like it's just there for the author to experiment with and try things. The blacking out and rewriting of queer history is meaningful. The writing style fits with the themes. It's really clever. I think there is something for all types of readers. There's emotional, there's big brain energy, there's nice writing, there is a million Easter eggs. It is a really rereadable book. And I just know that I have read a really great book here. But have I personally enjoyed it? Have I appreciated it? Have I got something out of it? Yes, but not as much as the craft of the book would dictate. I liked this book, but I have enjoyed many a book of inferior quality much more. And I think the key to whether you pick up this book is to know what your feelings are with experimental fiction, to know how much that puts you off or excites you. Lie With Me by Phillipe Besson, translated by Molly Ringwald. Phillipe, same first name as the author, sees a man walking down the street he thinks he recognises. A man who bears a striking resemblance to his first love, Thomas, a boy he had an affair with in high school, but who didn't acknowledge him at school in front of his peers. Besson describes the gay love affair between a boy who is comfortable exploring his sexuality and one who wishes to hide it. It is a very short novel, 150 pages. It's happy in places, it's mostly sad, and it really deals with the gay experience well. And I guess the reason that this book is good and not amazing is that I'm not the target audience. It is written so that queer people can feel seen by the literature. While I can appreciate the emotional complexity of the characters, the nice, although fairly simple plot, and the author or translator's lovely writing, I can't get the full experience the queer reader will have. So if you are queer and you want a simple but lovely book about a coming-of-age gay romance and the early exploration of sexuality, I cannot recommend this book enough. The next 6 books are accelerating up towards amazing. They're better than good. If we're talking star ratings, they're on the cusp of 4 and 5. 84 Charing Cross Road by Haniff. This book is charming. It is essentially just a collection of letters between a New York-based woman, Haniff herself, and a man who looks after her at a used bookshop in London, Frank Doyle. The letters are mostly things like, "Can you find Chaucer for me? I've enclosed $3. Or, "I have sent you an 1899 copy of Chaucer. The cost is $2, so I will add the extra $1 to your account." Between that, in the postscripts of the letters, there are conversations about life. Based just after World War II ends, Haniff offers to ship eggs, or Doyle is always inviting her to London and offering her a place to stay. It really is just a book about a friendship. The New York combination of prickliness and warmth that makes Haniff, and the very middle-class Englishness and dry sense of humour that makes Doyle. It is heartwarming, nice, funny, and sad. Maeve Fly by C.J. Leede. I think when you finish this book, if your first reaction isn't, "What the actual fuck did I just read?" then you probably read a different book to me. This is the sort of book that when somebody recommends it, you consider asking whether they're okay or not. Yet, it's really intriguing. I really enjoyed the feminization of some of the most over-the-top transgressive books in the canon. The Story of the Eye, The Marquis de Sade, but particularly American Psycho. Pieces of this book are indeed directly taken from Bret Easton Ellis and written into the voice of Maeve Fly. But don't let the comparisons to American Psycho put you off. It's a rather low bar, but Leede has written a much better book than Alice. She doesn't repeat herself for a start. She slowly amps up the horror and the gore as the novel progresses, producing an emotional arc. She bothers to create characters, and she has modernized the themes. Maeve is working as an ice princess at the happiest Californian theme park on Earth. She loves all things Halloween. She is caring for her former screen icon but dying grandmother. A grandmother who has spotted the darkness in Maeve that nobody else understands. Maeve frequents a bar where the only other person is a Johnny Depp lookalike, or maybe the actual Johnny Depp, and she's having complex feelings about her best friend's brother, Gideon. An extreme splatterpunk horror novel that is not going to be for everyone's taste. Leede infuses her novel with themes of isolations, identity, and depression. This is not a novel for everybody. If you liked Ottessa Moshfegh but think she's a little bit too wholesome, pick this book up. If you liked Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, this is a good one. Men have always been permitted in fiction and in life to simply be what they are, no matter how dark or terrifying that might be. But with a woman, we expect an answer, a reason. Mayfly. Co-Wives, Co-Widows by Adrienne Yabouza, translated from French by Rachel McGill. In the Central African Republic, the husband of two women dies suddenly and unexpectedly. The two women are friends, they are family. They care for each other and look out for each other. In the background, there are elections, and this allows Yabouza to inject some real African sarcasm in the novel. I wouldn't say that this is a funny book by any means, but when the opportunity presents itself to be funny, it's definitely not passed up. This is a book about life in the Central African Republic. It is about corruption, the role of women, widows, power, bribery. The friendship that these two women have for each other really comes through, and it is such a highlight. But you might be expecting this book would be about grief and polygamy, and it really isn't. It is feminist. It is showing us society, showing us the choices that widows have, and it is just a really good but very simple book. Neves by Sasha Naspini, translated from Italian by Clarissa Botford. This is the story of a 66-year-old woman whose husband, a hard-working farmer, dies. Needing companionship, she brings a chicken inside the house. One night, while they're watching TV together, a washing machine advert hypnotizes the chicken, placing it into a trance from which Neve cannot wake it. Unsure what to do, she calls up the local useless drunken vet. This is quite a humorous novel. Neve has a daughter who has moved away from the Italian town she was brought up in to marry a Frenchman, and she continues to offer her mother a room there to stay and live. And this produces some hilarious and quite harmless insults towards the French people. Most of this novel is a telephone call between Neves and the vet. Being from a small town, everybody knows everybody else, and everybody has a history with everybody else. Lonely Neve starts to pour her heart out to the vet, divulging the town's secrets. This is a novel about loss, love, relationship, grief, heartbreak, sex, nostalgia, loyalty, cheating, the choices not made, memory, and looking back, and the big question: can a chicken really replace a husband? This was just a joy to read. When we read literary fiction, we get so caught up with things like how are the themes explored, the writings, the metaphors, the character construction, and we don't focus on the simple joy a good read can bring us. None of this novel is done perfectly, but we often forget that we read books in order to enjoy them. We forget what makes a book enjoyable to us, investing in the characters, supporting them, laughing at their jokes, experiencing their highs and their lows, which is what this book is really good at doing. I think you will have an absolutely great time reading. Concerning My Daughter by Kim Hye-Jin, translated from Korean by Jamie Chan. There are two separate but very linked stories going on here, linked by characters too. The first story is about a 30-something woman, Green, who needs to move back in with her mother and bring her girlfriend Lane. The mother hasn't dealt with the daughter being gay. She wants her to find a good husband, to have children, but this isn't a story about homophobia. It is much more about a parent having to give up the future they saw for their child and respect that who their child loves is their choice. The other story is about the mother who is a nurse at an old folks home. She cares for patients with dementia who no longer have any family left. She is always running out of basic equipment because of funding cuts, reusing disposable items, and is generally not able to give these people the level of care she would like and most people would expect. However, she needs to be diplomatic. She might lose her job if she's not. She forms an attachment to an old lady who she looks after and advocates for. The thing I think is brilliant is how these stories overlap in ideas, how the way the dementia patient is treated helps the mother understand her daughter. There are little things. The dementia patient doesn't have children. Instead, she pursued a glamorous career as a diplomat, travelling the world. And yes, that's a very different reason for not having children to Green, but it is such a cool way of making the mother and the reader empathise with queer people. And this is essentially what the book is doing. We see the mother having difficulty accepting her daughter for specific reasons relating to her sexuality, and we see the similarities with the treatment and the life of this old lady, essentially pointing out the lack of logic in the societal attitudes towards LGBT people. It is so intelligent of the author to see the links between these things and to explore them. Such a unique argument for the fair and compassionate treatment of gay people. A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is another book with a really interesting backstory. Siobhan Dodd came up with the premise, characters, and the beginning while she was ill with cancer. Dodd ran out of time to write this novel, and Ness was asked if he could write the book. This is an upper middle grade early YA horror novel. Not what I usually read. I'm terrible with age categories. Connor's mother is ill. None of her treatments seem to work. His grandmother is coming to visit. Something he rejects. They can look after themselves. They don't need her help. Connor is very clearly rejecting everything to do with his mother's illness. He is too scared to face the realities. Then one night, a monster visits him and tells him a story. The monster will visit him a further 2 times, and then Connor must tell the monster a story. The story he is avoiding. This is why I like picking up books outside of my comfort zone. Not only is this a fantastic book, but I would never have picked up a book like this. But this book is so miserable and sad, and I absolutely loved it. 10 books to go, and these are my 10 5-star reads. The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. Set in 1918 during the Spanish flu, nurse Julia Powers works at an understaffed Dublin hospital for expecting mothers who have contracted this illness and must quarantine together. Dr. Kathleen Lynn is a rebel on the run from the police, but is risking everything to save lives in the hospital. Bridie Sweeney is a young volunteer who knows very little about nursing, but is hardworking, quick, and eager to help. This book is essentially set in the hospital over 3 very eventful days. A lot of this book is just hospital drama. Women giving birth in the breech position. The drama of, can we save the mother? Can we save the baby? Which shouldn't be super interesting, but it really is. It serves to build the relationships between these 3 women, the attitudes of the time, the characters themselves. It allows Donoghue to be critical of the medical system, the attitudes towards women and motherhood, the roles of the church, attitudes to queer people, and it discusses the impact of the First World War. And it's just really captivating. One thing I found really interesting about this book is Dr. Kathleen Lynn was a real person. She was friends with Sylvia Pankhurst, and she was involved with Sinn Féin. So she's a suffragette and a socialist. She also fought in the War of Independence and was a lesbian. She just would have been one kick-ass doctor. Whenever Donoghue writes a good story, it really works, and this is one of her best. Minor Details by Adana Shabibli, translated from Arabic by Elizabeth Jackie. At 112 pages, this novel is short, but it's actually 2 stories. Starting in 1949, a year after the Nakba, an event that led to the displacement of 700 Palestinians, we witness soldiers capture and rape a young woman, then kill her and bury her in the sand. Born exactly 25 years after the young girl's murder, Ramallah learns about her in an article. She is a side note in a much larger and broader article, and Ramallah becomes fascinated in the details and travels across the country through security checkpoints to visit the archives and find out what exists of this woman. The tension of that trip is heart-in-mouth stuff. Shabli uses images created in the first section and places them in the second section of this novel. The smell of gasoline, for example. But it has the added effect of helping you realise how similar the stories of these 2 women are. But it is the way this book ends that really just pushes it all the way into 5-star territory. I don't have a lot else to say about this. Themes of occupation, displacement, state-sanctioned terror and force. Small Joys by Elvin James Mencher. The book I DNF'd last year and reread. For me, this really points out that I need to be in the right mood for a book. When I tried this book last year, it was the last book in a run of bad books, in a big run of DNFs, and it led me to change over to non-fiction for a bit. This time I'm reading it with a collection of good to excellent books, and it really worked for me. This book begins with Harley moving back in with his friend Chelsea after he drops out from college. But rather than move in with Chelsea, he is planning to kill himself. These plans are interrupted by Muddy. Harley finds himself with a clinging, annoying, Oasis-loving best mate. Clinging and annoying because he won't leave him alone to kill himself. Muddy has taken Harley's old room, so will be living with him while Harley moves into the spare room. Muddy's best mate Finley is dating Chelsea. Meanwhile, Muddy is dating Chelsea's mate Noria. Harley is gay and develops a friendship with Murray and Finley, where Murray and Finley seem to argue over who is the better friend and who Harley thinks is more attractive. It's Muddy, by the way. Finley is a bit of an alpha type and Harley doesn't quite get on with him. Noria and Harley become friends on account of them both being black. Meanwhile, Harley starts hiding things from his old best friend Chelsea. The creation of characters and relationships, different types of relationships, that is first class. This book is just a slow burn. It's lovely. These are 5 different characters who are just so easy to like, to fall in love with, to care about. If you are a character-driven reader who enjoys books about mental health, friendship and recovery, then this is a must-read. And I will say it, I was wrong to DNF this book, but I'm very glad I read it now and didn't read it when I first picked it up. And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliot. If you had have said Scott, you're going to love a literary thriller that is a pretty heavy magical realism novel, I would have laughed at you. But yet, here we are. Alice is an Indigenous woman who has just given birth to Dawn. She has a white husband who is an academic and is learning the Mohawk language for her so he can teach Dawn it. As they move into a wealthy Toronto neighbourhood, Alice starts to feel detached, failing to connect to Dawn and being the only Indigenous woman in the neighbourhood. And as the reader, I couldn't tell if the neighbours were being a bit passive-aggressive and a bit micro-aggressive to her, or if this was the start of her becoming paranoid. Dawn won't stop crying, leading to nights without sleep and pushing Alice to the edge. Her husband thinking the neighbours are being nice, the memories of when she was 13 and Pocahontas started to talk to her, and not the Disney version. Conversations with a time-travelling cockroach continue to build the pressure on Alice, displaying her mental health struggles, but they all serve to display the societal gaslighting of Indigenous women as well. At one point, Alice starts to ponder the difference between her and her husband. Thinking about Dawn, she ponders, she will inherit his intergenerational wealth and my intergenerational trauma. I really liked that thought. It is the story of a woman suffering from postpartum depression, pushed to her limits and needing help with her mental health and her life. It is also allegorical. Alice becomes convinced she needs to save Dawn, the future of Mohawk women, from whatever the white people in the neighbourhood are doing. She is both paranoid and the subject of countless microaggressions. The book flicks between magical realism, literary fiction, horror, thriller, mythology, fantasy. It's really messy, but it was able to show me exactly what Alice is feeling in these extreme situations. And the magical realism was utilised to show me her lack of grasp on reality, and I thought that was absolutely wonderful. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, translated from Italian by Anne Goldstein. I was really close to DNFing this book, and I said to myself, just give it a little bit more and make sure you're certain. And that was all it needed to suck me in, and it was absolutely brilliant. The complex nature of the friendship between these two girls, or women as they are later in the novel. It begins with Elena receiving a phone call from her friend Lilia's son. She is missing. Suspecting the disappearance is deliberate, she begins to record her life. What a spiteful way to want to write about your friend. Elena Ferrante is a pen name, while people have figured out who she is now. At the time of writing, not so much was known. She was born in Naples in the 1940s, the same as Elena from the book. She is putting herself in the novel, but taking herself out of society. It's an interesting choice. These two girls grow up in poverty, these remarkably academically gifted girls, especially Lilia. Lilia's parents stop sending her to school, while Elena's parents are convinced to continue. There is so much in the book. The competitive nature of female friendship, like who gets breast first, who gets their period first, the way boys treat them, the desire to become a woman, the beginnings of relationships, getting married, the fear of being left behind, both in friendship and in life. It is so connective. It is so beautifully written. If I'm going to criticize this book, it is that I hate it when characters have multiple names. Just keep it simple unless there's a point to it. But this is such a minor criticism. I may be one of the last people to have read this masterpiece. If I'm not, this is for readers who love character growth, relationship, and friendship. I have 5 books to go, and the truth is that all 5 books are exceptional. There are many a reading a Booktuber's best books video, where any one of these 5 would have come out on top if they were in that video. But before I mention them, I would like to thank my wonderful Patreons for their support. I would like to shout out my newest member, Rita. If you've made it this far in the video, you can't hate my book reviews, so why not consider signing up to my Patreon? We read 2 books a month. You're free to join in the books that you wish and skip the ones that you don't, as long as the lemon tree goes. By Zoulfa Katouh. A war breaks out in Syria. Salama, an 18-year-old pharmacy student, begins working in a hospital. Her parents gone, her brother gone, in body, but not in spirit. She keeps seeing him, having conversations with him. All that is left is Salama and her sister-in-law. If I could break this novel down into the mini stories that made up the novel, Salama is a young woman learning how to become a surgeon. With no training, Salama and her sister-in-law are plotting to escape to Germany, figuring out how to raise the money needed to get on the boat, what they can sell. Salama meets a young man caring for his younger sibling, and they fall in love. Then there was this constant threat of armed forces, the snipers on the street, daily life and death situations. Of course, all these things intersect with each other brilliantly. I must confess that a love story in the middle of a war is an interesting one, but I've never lived through a war, and I read it as clinging to normality, as I'm giving up so much of myself for others right now. I need something for me. What this book does well is communicate the fear, the randomness, and the closeness to death that are the realities of the Syrian war, which is currently only at a ceasefire. It is still running and it can still flare up. This book also does something absolutely amazing. I'm not going to mention it, but if you've read the book, it's to do with the sister-in-law. And I think that was done incredibly well. The whole time I read this book, I didn't realize it was a young adult book either. And after The Hate You Give and now this book, I need to at least look at that genre again. If you read a lot of YA books and you've read this book, I would love to know if you think it's a YA book and if it's typical of a certain type of YA book. Personally, if this is what is being written for a young adult audience, I just don't want to miss out. This was everything I love in my literature. Tough themes of war, loss, violence, and survival. Well-built characters, great plot, great arc, tense setting. It educated me on Syria and the war they had. It made me empathize with the characters. And there was a moment that I needed to stop reading and just say, shit. Adult, young adult, I don't care. This was a top novel. The Book of Night Women, Marlon James. Lilith is born into a Jamaican sugar plantation as a slave. She is part of a plan for the slaves to revolt. But will she become the revolt's weak link? Slaves outnumber their oppressors 33-1. The white owners fear the slave numbers, and they are particularly brutal to their slaves as a result. A group called the Night Women plan for 6 plantations to attack at once. For a slave, Lilith gets slightly better treatment. She is still horribly mistreated, but one theory is that her unknown father is actually her owner and that he raped her mother. This is such a brilliant concept that James uses. It allows him to explore class and privilege within the slave community. And then on top of that, he has Irish people coming over and working on the plantation who are also very mistreated by the British plantation owners. There are so many different stratifications of oppression within this novel. There wasn't just one experience of being a slave. Some slaves had it worse. And what James is showing us is the entire system at play. Every walks in a circle. Take that and make of it what you will. A circle like a sun, a circle like the moon, a circle like bad tidings that seems gone but always comes back. Circles and cycles are another theme James is exploring. The cycle of the planting season, of rebellion and defeat, of slave loyalty and betrayal. And after all, a circle stays in the same place. Things might get momentarily better or worse, but a slave is always a slave in this society. Marlon James does not believe in cutting away or in fading to black. He does not believe in saving his readers the horrors that black slaves went through. He doesn't want to erase that part of history. He doesn't want to be nice about it. I love that he did that. It's so important. But if you are a sensitive reader, probably best that you avoid Marlon James's novels. All of them, not just this one. In showing us these acts, James is trying to humanize the slaves of the past. But in Lilith, James is showing us human flaws and desires. What Lilith wants and craves is not freedom, but one of the most human desires of all. Love. She didn't know who her mother was. She only learns who her father is during the book. And it is this lack of love that fuels the darkness inside her. And I love this darkness. Slave narratives are so often painting the slaves as the good guys. And it is only in comparison to the slave owners that they are the good guys. But they're people. Some are good, some are bad, some are otherwise. And Lilith is evil. Whatever that could mean in this horrible world is almost a meaningless title, and James is pointing that out. But the concept of good or evil, of morality, is so often stripped from slaves, allowing them to have more of their personality than flesh that they are whipped is so important. And Lilith is evil. And it could be argued that she is evil to survive, that she is evil as a product of her situation. But the point is that James has given her agency. The point is that there were millions and millions of slaves, and they surely weren't all the same. This is the second Marlon James book that I have read that I have absolutely loved. I think A Brief History of 7 Killings is one of the best books I have ever read. And of all of James's novels, it is the most similar to the Book of Night Women. As far as recommendations go, whatever you thought of Brief History is going to pretty closely match what you think of this book. James writes in different styles for different books, so I'd almost say if you're looking at this book, ignore what you think of his magical realism and his fantasy, because it's just so different. Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. Set in 1990s London, a 3-year-old girl has been found murdered with bruises around her neck. The last person to see her was 7-year-old Lucy, belonging to an Irish immigrant family, the Greens, who have a reputation for drinking too much and collecting welfare. Carmel is Lucy's mother, ethereal and damaged, delicate, tiny, and our protagonist. We jump between the timelines where police are investigating the death and the timeline where Carmel is a teenager in Ireland. There is a tabloid involvement too. They are paying for the Greens' hotel bill in return for the interview. Any average writer would have placed together the facts to make it about whether the 7-year-old is guilty or innocent. That is a simple story arc that will sell books. What Nolan is interested in is the stigma attached to the family, the assumption of guilt, even from within the Green family, their place in society. Nolan is also examining the ethics of journalism, intergenerational trauma, and alcoholism. Nolan has created an absolutely horrific event. Then rather than hang the book on it, she's turning the mirror on society. Really, who would care about a family like theirs? Theirs were ordinary human failings, tragedies too routine to be of note. Nolan is drawing us to this quote by naming the book after it. And it's a quote that intersects with so many of the themes of the novels, that adds to so much of the book. Tom, the reporter, is interested in the family. The community are interested in them now, but they were not so much interested in them before. They could be anybody. But this is what trauma, class, and bad luck can all add up to create a lost family. Nobody did care about them before. They take advantage of them, cheat them, and push them to the bottom. It's a good quote from an incredible book, very different to Nolan's first novel too. Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis. Why did life put so much inside a woman and then keep her confined to smallness? 1977 Uruguay. Military rule. Gatherings of 5 or more people are seen as subversive behaviours and are illegal. 5 women, all clear, plan an escape together to an out-of-the-way beach at Cabo Polonio. The novel lasts 35 years, and in that time the women move back and forth between Cabo Polonio and Montevideo, sometimes together, sometimes with lovers, sometimes alone. While this is very much a story about being gay in an oppressive culture, the different lives you can live as a lesbian, the different ways of being a lesbian, I think the central themes are queer friendship and having a place and people where or to who you can just belong. This book is really hitting 2 things hard. Funny, it's a potato masher, and miserable: conversion therapy, torture, homophobia, being rejected by a parent, gang rape, domestic abuse, marital rape, assault, pedophilia. There is a long list of horrible things in this novel. Flakka is the glue of the group, a butcher and a butch. Her family are aware of her sexuality, but given the era, they say nothing about it. To hell with the danger. I don't care if they kill me. I will have lived along the way. The importance of being true to yourself is explored through Flakka. Romina is her ex and her current best friend. Her brother has been detained and jailed for suspected association with the resistance, something she knows to be true. Romina is just as worried about her sexuality being discovered as she is that her brother's links with the resistance will be proven. Anita, or La Venus, is Flakka's current girlfriend, a married woman living an unfulfilled marriage. At 27, she is the oldest member of the group. Paz walks into the butcher's shop that Flakka runs, and Flakka recognises a fellow friend of Sappho. At 15 years, Paz is the youngest. Milena makes up the group. She is friends with Romina, quiet, guarded, empathetic. She would have been a very difficult character to write, and she has done it so well, pointing out just how good her character work is here. A truly special novel. The best book this year is Loop Tracks by Sue Orr. In 1978, Auckland's only abortion clinic was forced to close. 16-year-old Charlie has to fly to Sydney, but the flight is delayed. In 2019, Charlie lives with her grandson Tommy. Tommy is 18, about to begin university, and he is on the spectrum. He meets Jenna and falls in love for the first time. Jenna good-naturedly starts to cause issues when she convinces Tommy that he should know who his father is. I'm not sure autism was ever mentioned with Tommy, but Orr's writing of this character makes it so clear. If he's not autistic, he's based on somebody who is autistic. These special interests, the sense of social justice, the fierce adherence to the rules. This is not all his character, of course, but it is an example of Orr's great character writing. Charlie is also brilliantly rendered. The traces of the 16-year-old we see repeated in the 57-year-old is brilliant. Tommy becomes involved in politics. He's a Jacinda fan, supporting her early lockdown and actions on climate change. Now, if you don't know who Jacinda Ardern is, she was New Zealand Prime Minister and a progressive and centre-left politician. As an Aussie, I always find it funny that she was voted Australia's most trusted politician 4 years running, 2019 to 2022. 2020 was an election year for New Zealand, and they also held 2 referendums at the same time, one on cannabis and the other on euthanasia. It is very clear that Tommy doesn't understand euthanasia to begin with, but he keeps an open mind, taking information from everywhere, reading it all and researching it. This leads Tommy into a certain group who are pretty anti-euthanasia, but they're also pretty anti-abortion. Discussions around these 2 topics become a big part of a novel, but what I think Orr does brilliantly here is to keep the characters and the relationships going. How does kind, left-leaning Tommy adoption of right-wing politics impact his love life? How does his anti-abortion opinions impact his relationship with his grandmother? Alt-right groups seem to target autistic men, but I've never seen that in a novel before. I've always wondered, why autistic men? And Orr has given me so much more understanding into that. Charlie keeps secrets. She won't tell Tommy who his parents are. She does not lie, she just doesn't inform him. She has reasons for doing that. And as we learn more about Charlie, both teenage Charlie and 57-year-old Charlie, it slowly starts to become clear why that is. The story of Tommy's father is particularly daunting and has some really dark themes in it. This novel is not just tackling adoption, abortion, euthanasia, and COVID. This novel tackles addiction, drug dealing, parent-child relationships, and rape. And what I love about all of this is that it is done in a truly timeless way. Often when I am pulling themes out of books, I wonder if the author was watching the review and if they will be saying, yeah, I definitely meant to include that theme. Or includes themes in the early timelines and in the later timelines, discussing them in different ways. It makes both timelines so important, and the narrative style to change between both timelines, that works fantastically. Abortion is discussed in a very human impact way in 1978, and in 2020, Tommy is discussing it in a very intellectual and emotionally driven way, very divorced from the human impacts which he honestly does think he is considering. Despite Tommy's interest in some pretty misguided ideas, or manages to keep you supporting him. You never want him punished or hurt. You never want him to have his comeuppance. You want him to redeem himself. Deep down, it is very hard not to forgive Tommy and to just wish he would get it. The relationship between Charlie and Tommy is such a good indication of this too. Charlie loves Tommy, she supports him, but at times she is very frustrated with him. At times she is really angry with him. The nuances of those relationships, the complex feelings Orr creates towards Tommy, they're not easy to craft and they're quite exceptionally done. I've intentionally kept quite big parts of the plot out of this review. I think the unwrapping of it and not knowing certain things really enhances the experience for you, even at the expense of making it a somewhat less seductive book review. But please know that the plot, like the characters' themes and prose, is excellent. If you've watched this entire video, even if you've done it on double speed, that's one big commitment, and I thank you for your time and support. I hope you've been rewarded with exciting new books to read and exciting new booktubers to watch. I've created a similar video to this once every 6 months I've been on Booktube. I'll put the link to the most recent iterations on the screen right now. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.